Mental spaces theory is a highly influential cognitive theory of meaning construction. Mental spaces theory is a highly influential cognitive theory of meaning construction. Mental spaces theory is a highly cognitive theory of meaning construction.
Alright, focus. Just a few more pages to go. But what is this even saying? It's like they're speaking another language. But I have my exam tomorrow. I can't give up now. I have been staring at this for hours, and it's all just gibberish to me. Maybe I should ask Palak for some help. She always seems to understand this stuff.
Hi Palak, can you tell me about mental spaces? I cannot understand a thing.
Sure, Adarsh. Mental spaces are a bit tricky to understand at first, but it becomes clearer as we understand the basics of it. You can see mental spaces as the way how we construct meanings. It involves two processes. First is building mental spaces, and second, establishing mappings between them.
Okay, but what about mental spaces? What are those exactly?
Mental spaces are conceptual regions where specific kinds of information are stored. They are like temporary packets of conceptual structures that we create on the fly during conversations or when processing information.
I see. But how do we build these mental spaces?
We build them using linguistic units called space builders. These are like cues in language that prompt us to construct new mental spaces or shift our attention between existing ones.
Interesting. But what about mappings you mentioned earlier?
Mappings are the connections we establish between different mental spaces. They are guided by the context of the conversation that we are in.
Great. But I think this is too bookish. Can you help me with some examples?
Okay, let's take an interesting example. Imagine a scenario where two people are sitting on a bench and are having a conversation.
Okay, I am picturing it. What is the conversation about?
Well, one of the men asks, what was the Indian president's name in 1958?
Seems like a straightforward question.
Exactly. Most people would interpret it as it is asking who was the current president in 1958 and answer with the name of the president of that time, which was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. But the other man responds with Draupadi Murmu.
Wait, why would he say Draupadi Murmu? Isn't she the current president?
That's true, but here's where the interpretation gets interesting. The question can be understood in two different ways. One interpretation is asking for the name of the president in 1958, which leads to Dr. Rajendra Prasad. But the other interpretation is asking for Draupadi Murmu's name in 1958, which is still Draupadi Murmu.
I see. So depending on how you interpret the question, you can get two different answers.
Exactly. And this demonstrates how the access principle comes into play. By accessing the mental space of the current president, which is Draupadi Murmu, in 2024, we interpret the question differently.
That is pretty clever. So, by using the access principle, we can navigate through different mental spaces to find the most relevant information.
Precisely. And as we encounter more complex scenarios and multiply the number of mental spaces, our ability to interpret and understand them also becomes more complex.
It's incredible how our minds effortlessly handle all these mental spaces and interpretations.
Great, let's apply our existing knowledge to another example and explore this further. Imagine we are discussing Romeo and Juliet and someone says maybe Romeo is in love with Juliet. The English sentence brings in a frame from our pre-structured background cultural knowledge X in love with Y. In this frame there are two highlighted roles, the lover X and the loved one Y.
So here Romeo is the lover and Juliet is the loved one, right?
Exactly. And the word maybe acts as a space builder. It sets up a possibility space related to the discourse base space at that point.
I see. But what is the base space?
In the base space, we have elements A and B associated with the names Romeo and Juliet. These elements have been linked to other frames by background knowledge and previous meaning construction in the conversation. The new sentence sets up a possibility space and creates counterparts A dash and B dash for A and B, which can be identified by the names Romeo and Juliet, following the access principle. So now we have a new space, let's call it M.
But how is this new space structured?
It's structured internally by the frame X in love with Y, with Romeo being the lover A and Juliet being the loved one B. We denote this internal structure as love A dash B dash. So elements A dash and B dash in space M are associated with the names Romeo and Juliet, as well as other background structures from the counterparts A and B in the base space.
I think I understand. But what if there is a conflicting background structure?
Good question. If there is a conflicting background structure in the base space, it won't transfer to the new space. For example, if the conversation was about Romeo's hostile behavior towards Juliet, but the new space is explicitly about Romeo being in love with her, the background of hostility wouldn't transfer.
Great. I think I do understand this better now. This reminds me of a comic strip I read once. Let me tell you about it.
Sure, go ahead.
Imagine a scenario where a father is boasting to his family while watching television. He is watching a wrestling match featuring Hulk Hogan, a legendary wrestler. He says, "Oh, when I was in my prime, I was very strong and I could have pinned Hulk Hogan in a matter of seconds."
So he's creating this mental space where he's the champion wrestler defeating Hulk Hogan.
Yes, that is one interpretation. I think his statement sets up multiple mental spaces simultaneously. Firstly, there is a space where the father, in his prime, is a strong wrestler, represented by the counterpart Abel. Then there is a possibility space where he could have pinned Hulk Hogan, represented by A3.
And all of this happens with just one sentence.
Yes, each part of his statement constructs a different mental space. But here's where it gets interesting. The mother intervenes and shifts the perspective. She introduces a new mental space by suggesting that when the father was in his prime, Hulk Hogan was just a child in kindergarten. So, she creates counterparts for Hulk Hogan as a child, represented by D1.
So now we have a completely different mental space where the father is essentially bullying a child, not defeating a champion wrestler.
Precisely. This example highlights how a single sentence can evoke multiple mental space configurations and how our interpretations can change based on the context and perspective.
Wow, that is fascinating. It really shows the complexity of mental spaces and how they influence our understanding of language and discourse.
Yes, absolutely. I think these examples give us a glimpse into how we construct meaning in various contexts, whether it is through language, visuals, or even everyday interactions.
In this video, we explored the concept of mental spaces as dynamic territories where information is temporarily stored. Mental spaces are flexible structures that we create during conversations or while processing information. They serve as crucial tools for organizing and manipulating concepts, enabling us to navigate the complexities of language and cognition. Coming to space builders, linguistic units known as space builders play a pivotal role in constructing mental spaces. These units encompass words, phrases, and expressions that delineate and populate mental territories. By using space builders, we shape the boundaries and content of mental spaces, facilitating effective communication and comprehension. Mappings are the connections we establish between different mental spaces. These connections enable the transfer of information and the integration of diverse concepts. By navigating and linking various mental territories through mappings, we enhance our understanding and ability to convey complex ideas. The access principle guides how we transition between mental spaces. It dictates that we access mental territories based on relevance and cognitive efficiency. By adhering to this principle, we select and activate the most appropriate mental spaces during comprehension and expression, ensuring effective communication and reasoning. In summary, mental spaces, space builders, mappings, the access principle all collectively contribute to our cognitive processes, enhancing our ability to construct meaning and engage in effective communication. Thank you.